What would make an adopted son take the lives of the two people who brought him into their home and called him their own? Mark and Andrew, a loving couple with everything to offer, a stable home, warm smiles, and open hearts. They were known to friends and neighbors as a beacon of kindness and care. Together, they decided to open their world to a child who needed it most. Lucas was 6 years old when they brought him home, a boy with a difficult start to life, given a second chance by two men who believed they could be the family he had never known. 4 years, they seemed inseparable, a picture-perfect bond. School projects, family holidays, birthdays, and milestones, all shared with pride and love. But then, one night, everything changed. The quiet calm of their suburban neighborhood was shattered by the sound of gunshots. Police arrived to find Mark and Andrew dead in their own home. Their lives ended in a way no one could have expected. The one responsible? Their son, Lucas. Why would a child do this? How could a family so full of promise end in such tragedy? Was there something no one saw coming? Or was the truth hidden in plain sight, locked behind closed doors? This is the story of a family that seemed like any other, a story of trust broken, pain buried deep, and the unthinkable act that would shock everyone who knew them. What happened in that house, and why did Lucas believe that murder was his only way out? It was supposed to be a home filled with hope. Mark and Andrew had waited years to build a family, opening their doors and their hearts to a young boy who needed them. Lucas was only 6 when he arrived, a child with a difficult past, now given a chance to grow up with the love and security every child deserves. 4 years, they were inseparable. Pictures hung on the walls, showing smiles from family vacations, laughter over birthday cakes, and countless happy memories. To those who knew them, they were the perfect example of what a loving home could look like. But one night, something unthinkable happened. 2 gunshots echoed through the house, piercing the stillness of the night. When police arrived, they found Mark and Andrew lifeless in their bedroom. The scene was devastating, but what shocked them even more was who pulled the trigger. Lucas, the boy they had raised as their own, stood at the center of it all. His hands were shaking, but his face was calm. In his eyes, there was no fear, no regret, only the weight of what he had done. Why would a child turn on the only people who gave him everything? What was going through his mind as he stood there in the dark, holding the weapon that ended their lives? This was no random act of violence. Something led to this. Something deep, buried, and horrifying. What began as a story of love became one of betrayal. What seemed like a home filled with joy became the site of an unthinkable tragedy. And the answer to why it all happened lies in the most disturbing of truths. Welcome to True Crime Files, where we uncover the darkest and most twisted stories that will keep you up at night. If you're fascinated by gripping true crime stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we have in store. Today, we explore a case that begins with hope, trust, and the promise of a new family but ends in betrayal and violence. This is the story of Mark, Andrew, and Lucas, a family torn apart by the darkest of secrets. Buckle up, it's going to be intense. It was a house filled with warmth, a home where laughter echoed through the halls, where birthdays were celebrated with balloons and cake, and where love seemed to shine in every corner. Mark and Andrew had worked hard to build this life together. They weren't just partners. They were a team, dedicated to each other and to making the world a better place. In their community, they were known as generous, caring, always the first to step up and help those in need. Neighbors admired their kindness, their unwavering bond. Together, they made the decision to expand their family, not just for themselves but for a child who needed them. In 2010, that child arrived. Lucas was 6 years old when Mark and Andrew brought him home. A boy who had known hardship, confusion, and loss was finally given what every child deserves: stability, love, and a second chance at life. The early years were everything anyone could have hoped for. The family of 3 shared holidays filled with joy, weekend outings to the park, and quiet nights reading bedtime stories. Lucas thrived under their care, his once guarded demeanor softening with each passing year. Photos showed a happy trio, Mark and Andrew beaming with pride, Lucas smiling like any child would in the arms of his parents. From school events to family vacations, they seemed inseparable. Mark and Andrew celebrated Lucas's milestones as if they were their own, cheering him on at soccer games, clapping for him during school recitals. Friends described them as the perfect family, living a life others envied. But what if appearances can lie? What if happiness can mask something no one is ready to see? And what if the truth is far more devastating than anyone could imagine? Because one night, that warm, loving house turned cold. In the dead of night, the sound of gunshots tore through the silence, shattering everything this family had built. Mark and Andrew, the parents who had given so much, were found lifeless in their bedroom. And the one responsible? Their son, Lucas, the boy they had promised to protect, the boy they had loved unconditionally. How does a story like this end in such unimaginable tragedy? What led Lucas to do what he did? And could anyone have seen it coming? Mark and Andrew, a loving gay couple, were known for their kindness and generosity in their community. They hosted fundraisers, helped their neighbors, and were the type of people who made others feel welcomed and valued. They shared a love that inspired those around them, and they had one dream that hadn't yet come true, the dream of becoming parents. In 2010, they made that dream a reality. After years of preparation and anticipation, they adopted a 6-year-old boy named Lucas. His early life had been marked by loss and instability, but Mark and Andrew were determined to give him a fresh start, a safe haven where he could finally be a child again. The bond they built was undeniable. From the very beginning, Mark and Andrew poured their energy into making Lucas feel like he belonged. Weekend road trips became a family tradition, with photos capturing moments of joy, Lucas holding ice cream, Mark and Andrew laughing beside him. At school events, they were always the proud parents in the audience, clapping the loudest, cheering the hardest. On holidays, their home was filled with decorations, gifts, and the kind of love that radiated warmth. To anyone looking in, they were a family who had it all. A bond stronger than words, a love that seemed unshakable. Mark and Andrew had built a life that seemed unshakable. From the outside, theirs was the kind of family people admired, a couple deeply in love, creating a home filled with warmth and care. Their decision to adopt Lucas, a boy who had known more pain in 6 years than most would in a lifetime, was seen as a testament to their compassion. Lucas arrived with shy eyes and a guarded heart. But slowly, under their watchful care, he began to bloom. His school reports improved, his laughter grew louder, and his trust in the world around him began to rebuild. Mark and Andrew celebrated every step of his journey, from his first school recital to his first soccer goal, capturing each moment with the pride only parents can understand. But one night, everything they had worked for fell apart. Mark and Andrew were found lifeless in their home, victims of a brutal act that no one saw coming. And the person responsible was Lucas, their adopted son, the boy they had taken in, loved, and raised as their own. How does something like this happen? How does a child go from embracing his parents to pulling the trigger that ends their lives? To find the answer, we must go back to the beginning and uncover the events that no one outside that house could have imagined. This is not just a story of a crime. It is a story of pain, betrayal, and a darkness that took hold where love once thrived. But behind closed doors, Lucas's childhood took a tragic turn. What began as love and care, as hugs and bedtime stories, became something far more horrific after his 10th birthday. The parents who were meant to protect him crossed a line that should never be crossed. Lucas's world began to crumble. The once vibrant, playful boy who filled the house with laughter grew silent. His bright eyes dulled, and his joy faded. At school, his teachers noticed he no longer raised his hand in class, no longer smiled when praised. But no one knew the truth. With no one to confide in, Lucas carried the weight of his pain alone. It consumed him, slowly breaking him down. Each day, he retreated further into himself, finding no way out of the nightmare that had become his reality. Desperate for an escape, Lucas turned to the only place he felt he could be heard, the internet. Late at night, while the house was silent, he stumbled upon an anonymous website where people shared their darkest secrets. For the first time, he spoke about what was happening, pouring out the words he couldn't say to anyone else. On the other end, someone listened. They offered him sympathy, encouragement, and eventually, a solution, one that Lucas could never have imagined on his own. In his fragile state, he clung to their words, desperate for a way to end his suffering. What he didn't know was how far this conversation would take him, and how it would forever alter the course of his life, and the lives of those around him. Lucas was 6 years old when he was given a second chance at life. Mark and Andrew, two men who shared a deep love and a strong commitment to each other, had made the decision to adopt him. They wanted to be the family he had never had, to give him the love and stability every child deserves. At first, it seemed like they had succeeded. Lucas thrived in his new home, his once shy and hesitant demeanor transforming into something brighter. He laughed easily, played without fear, and for a while, it seemed as though his difficult start in life had been left behind. Mark and Andrew were proud of him, celebrating every small achievement, every milestone. Together, they painted a picture of what love and acceptance could achieve. But that picture began to crack in ways no one could see. Behind the doors of their home, a darkness took hold, one that Lucas couldn't escape. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't obvious, but as time passed, the family's story shifted in ways no one could have imagined. Late one night, police were called to a quiet suburban home. They entered to find a scene of horror, Mark and Andrew lifeless in their bedroom. The couple who had been known for their generosity and love were gone, victims of an unimaginable act. And the person responsible? Lucas, the boy they had raised, the boy they had called their son. What happened in that house? What led Lucas to take such a drastic step? And how does a child reconcile the love they once felt with the hatred that drove them to kill? This is a story of love turned to pain, of trust broken beyond repair, and of the unimaginable depths one can reach when pushed to the brink. By the time Lucas turned 10, the world he had come to trust had begun to collapse around him. What started as a loving home became a place of fear and despair. The parents he once adored began to inflict a pain he couldn't understand, a pain no child should ever endure. Each day became a battle to hold himself together, each night a struggle to find peace. With no one to confide in, Lucas retreated further into himself. His laughter disappeared, replaced by long silences and distant stares. At school, he stopped engaging, his teachers noticing a growing emptiness in his eyes. Friends drifted away, unable to reach him. Lucas was alone, carrying the weight of his pain with no outlet and no escape. In his desperation, he found solace in the only place he could, the internet. Late at night, after Mark and Andrew had gone to bed, Lucas would sit in the glow of his computer screen, typing out words he couldn't bring himself to say aloud. On an anonymous forum, he found someone willing to listen. He didn't know their name, their age, or their intentions. All he knew was that they understood his pain and seemed to care in a way no one else did. But the comfort they provided came with a cost. As their conversations deepened, the stranger began to plant an idea in Lucas's mind, an idea that felt like both a solution and an escape. They told him he didn't have to live this way, that there was a way out. At first, he resisted. The thought was too much, too overwhelming. But over time, as his pain grew unbearable, the idea began to take root. Lucas became consumed by the thought of ending his suffering, but the only way to do that, he believed, was to end the lives of the people who caused it. Resentment turned to hatred, and hatred turned to resolve. He began to plan, quietly, methodically, as though it were the only thing keeping him grounded. One night, Lucas found what he needed, a weapon. He had no experience with it, but that didn't matter. He was focused, determined. The boy who had once sought love and protection now stood on the edge of a decision that would change everything. In the early hours of the morning, when the house was silent and the world outside was asleep, Lucas made his move. He walked down the hallway toward his parents' bedroom, his heart pounding in his chest. His hands trembled as he gripped the weapon, but his steps didn't falter. Inside the room, Mark and Andrew lay unaware of the storm about to unfold. Lucas stood at the doorway for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing, his body frozen. But then, something inside him snapped. 2 gunshots rang out, shattering the stillness of the night. The sound echoed through the house, marking the end of a family and the beginning of a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. As the smoke cleared and the silence returned, Lucas stood there, staring at what he had done. His hands were shaking, but his face was blank. He had made his choice, and now there was no going back. When police first arrived at the scene, they were confronted with more questions than answers. A couple known for their kindness and community involvement lay lifeless in their bedroom. Their adopted son, Lucas, sat in silence, his expression unreadable. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply waited. The initial investigation focused on the crime itself. What could drive a 16-year-old boy to commit such an act? There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of outside involvement. The house was quiet, undisturbed, save for the terrible tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. Detectives combed through the family's home, searching for clues. Neighbors were interviewed. Teachers, friends, and extended family were questioned. Everyone said the same thing. Mark and Andrew were loving parents who doted on their son. They couldn't imagine any reason for what had happened. The family had seemed so normal, so happy. But as investigators dug deeper, the picture began to change. Lucas's teachers spoke of a once vibrant boy who had grown withdrawn and distant. Friends recalled moments when Lucas seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere. And then there was the search history on his computer, queries that hinted at a life far more complex and troubled than anyone had known. It was in those digital footprints that investigators uncovered the first pieces of the truth. Lucas had spent countless hours on anonymous websites, pouring out his story to strangers. He described a life far removed from the idyllic image his parents projected. In these conversations, he revealed the abuse he had endured for years, abuse that had left him feeling trapped, helpless, and without hope. One chat log, in particular, stood out. It was with an unidentified individual who had listened to Lucas's pain and, over time, planted the seeds of a plan. The messages were chilling, filled with reassurances that Lucas could end his suffering, that there was only one way to free himself from the nightmare he was living. As the investigation unfolded, the details became impossible to ignore. Lucas wasn't just a teenager lashing out. He was a victim pushed beyond his limits, a boy who had reached out for help in the only way he knew how and had been met with encouragement to commit an unthinkable act. The revelation shook the community. News of the case spread quickly, sparking outrage and disbelief. People struggled to reconcile the image of Mark and Andrew as loving parents with the horrifying reality of what had happened behind closed doors. Protests erupted outside the family's home, and social media was flooded with debates. Some saw Lucas as a monster, a cold-blooded killer who had taken the lives of the people who gave him everything. Others saw him as a tragic figure, a boy failed by the very system that was supposed to protect him. Questions arose that no one could easily answer. How had the abuse gone unnoticed for so long? Why hadn't anyone intervened? And could this tragedy have been prevented if someone, anyone, had listened to Lucas earlier? For investigators, the case was far from straightforward. Every revelation brought more complexity, more layers to unravel. The focus shifted from what had happened to why it had happened, and the answers they found only deepened the sense of tragedy surrounding the case. Lucas sat in the interrogation room, silent and still. His expression gave nothing away. No anger, no fear, no remorse. To the detectives watching him, he was an enigma. What was going through his mind as he stood in his parents' bedroom, his hands trembling, his heart racing, and his life about to change forever? Was it anger that drove him to act, a burning fury that had been simmering for years? Or was it despair, a desperate need to escape a life he could no longer endure? As the minutes turned to hours and the questions piled up, the complexity of Lucas's state of mind became harder to unravel. Some psychologists would later argue that Lucas's actions were those of a victim seeking justice in the only way he knew how. Others saw a different narrative, one of a child so deeply shaped by trauma that he could no longer distinguish right from wrong. It's easy to look at the surface and see a clear divide, good versus evil, right versus wrong. But reality is rarely that simple. Lucas didn't wake up one day and decide to end the lives of the two people who raised him. His decision wasn't born out of a single moment of rage or impulse. It was the result of years of pain, of countless nights spent feeling trapped and alone, of a mind fractured by trauma and a heart burdened by fear. As we reflect on Lucas's story, we're forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Was he a cold-blooded murderer, or was he a child whose cries for help went unanswered for far too long? Did he see his actions as justice, as a way to reclaim power in a life where he had none? Or did he feel nothing at all, numb to the gravity of what he had done? This case is not just about Lucas, Mark, and Andrew. It's a stark reminder of the broader issues that plague our society. The devastating impact of abuse and the ways it destroys lives, not just in the moment but for years, even decades. For children like Lucas, abuse is not just a physical act. It's an emotional wound that festers, shaping how they see themselves and the world around them. It chips away at their sense of safety, their ability to trust, and their hope for a better future. And when that pain goes unnoticed, when there's no one to step in and offer support, the consequences can be catastrophic. This case also underscores the importance of mental health support for vulnerable children. Lucas was failed not just by his parents but by a system that didn't see his suffering. He needed someone to listen, someone to guide him through his pain, someone to remind him that his life was worth more than the darkness that surrounded him. But Lucas's story also forces us to examine the darker corners of human behavior. What drives people to abuse the ones they claim to love? What compels a parent to inflict pain on their child, knowing the damage it will cause? These are questions with no easy answers, yet they demand to be asked if we are to prevent tragedies like this in the future. As the world watched this case unfold, opinions were sharply divided. Some saw Lucas as a villain, someone who had crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Others saw him as a victim, a boy who acted out of desperation and pain. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Lucas's actions were undeniably horrifying, yet they were also the product of a life filled with suffering. His story is one of heartbreak and horror, of a child pushed to his breaking point by forces beyond his control. And as we reflect on what happened, we are left with one lingering question. How many more children are out there, suffering in silence, waiting for someone to notice before it's too late? A family once seen as the picture of love and unity, a couple admired by their neighbors, a child given a second chance at life, was torn apart in the most tragic way imaginable. What began with hope and promise ended in heartbreak and devastation. Behind the smiles and laughter, secrets festered. A young boy, too afraid to speak, endured pain that no child should ever face. And when the weight of it became too much to bear, the unthinkable happened. This is the story of Mark, Andrew, and Lucas, a family destroyed by betrayal and suffering, and a desperate act that left the world searching for answers. A seemingly perfect family torn apart by secrets, abuse, and an act of ultimate desperation. But what can we take away from this tragedy? Was Lucas a victim seeking an escape, or was he something more? Could there have been another way? These questions remain unanswered, haunting those who hear his story. Now, we turn to you. What would you have done in Lucas's shoes? Could you have endured, or would you have taken a similar path? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in discussions like these, Because stories like this are not just about the past. They are a call to look closer, to listen harder, and to act before it's too late. As we close this chapter, remember that Lucas's story is not unique. There are countless children who suffer in silence, their cries for help going unnoticed. If there's one thing we can take away, it's the importance of awareness, compassion, and the power of standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. And this is not the end. On True Crime Files, we dive into stories that challenge us to question, reflect, and engage. Next time, we'll uncover another chilling tale of betrayal and revenge, one that might make you question everything you think you know. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if it left you with more questions than answers, give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, these stories are more than entertainment. They are a chance to learn, to grow, and to make a difference. So, what do you think justice looks like in this case? Was it served? Or was it lost somewhere in the pain and complexity of it all? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and take care of each other.